y'all. Bridget Cutshall with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is John Grace, and he's a founder of a large investment firm, and he actually manages a team of over $1 billion in investments. That is huge. Can you say hi, John?
Hello, Brigitte. Glad to be with you. Yeah, part of a team managing about $1 billion right now.
Wow, that's just that word itself is amazing. So you've been in this field for many years, right? How long ago did you found your company?
Well, I started in 1979, founded Investors Advantage Corporation in 1986 or so.
Wow, you definitely been in the business for a while, and you've seen lots of different aspects, and so you really have a lot of knowledge. And this is a great example for those who are listening here to get some help with an expert, right? Because they've seen it, been down this path a few times and helped other customers. And John and I did talk a couple of weeks ago to try to dive a little deeper with what he's doing. And one of the things that I took away from that call, which I thought was funny, was math is a 4-letter word, which you brought up, because you are different than the other, competitors out there. You kind of look at, utilize math when you're helping each individual investor, right? Everybody's
well,
different.
yes. I mean, we all have to use math, whether we like it or not, understand it or don't. And yeah, I am fond of saying math is the only 4-letter word Americans are afraid to use. One of the things that we do that's really quite different is we pay for independent research, which helps us get a broader perspective about what's really going on in the economy, past the sales data. And of course, the securities industry, much like the real estate industry, it's always a good time to buy a stock, or a exchange traded fund, or some kind of a insurance product. And it's always a good time to buy a house, right? Well, sometimes there are better times to get your money off the table and prepare for a decline and enjoy the upside on the other side, as opposed to, what do they say? Cash is king. What do they say about equity? Crickets. So we like to help folks see, what's going on in a way that it makes sense to you to figure out what to move off the table, what to put on the table, when. And one of my best lines, frankly, is it's not about the prediction, because nobody can see the future, but it's all about the preparation. Here in California, if you're prepared for an earthquake that never happens, you're good, right? And if you're prepared for an earthquake that does happen, well, you just want to be able to tell your story about how you survived it, as opposed to going down and never being seen again, like the Titanic, right? It's all downhill from here.
Right, and I like your aspect of that, because people who listen to my podcast know I'm a health advocate, and I'm all about prevention and preparing. And you bring up, how you've got to be prepared for finances too, and financial health is something that we don't talk a lot about, or we're not taught that, or haven't taught that way in school. And that's why what you're providing is so important. Why don't we talk about this, right? Why don't we think it's important?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things going around. First and foremost, I think families in America, I don't find this in other countries, but we're afraid to talk about our money. It's private, right? So we all keep it, I don't know what we do with it. We just keep it in our own head, and we don't want anybody to know about it. But then we don't help our young children, or our children, young people, learn about how this works and how you can avoid some of the pitfalls. And then the industry, we like to call ourselves wealth managers, which I think is pretty arrogant, frankly. And so that excludes a lot of people. If you don't have $1 zillion, I can't talk to you. You're just not that important. And I think that adds to the problem. And one of the ways that I kind of summarize that is by saying, I apologize for my profession. I can, because I've only been in the business since 1979. And probably the primary message that the securities industry has delivered very well is buy and hold, sit and take it, hold and hope, stocks for the long term. And I think it really gives a different perspective when we move into the position where we start having to take money out, or needing to take money out. I mean, if you had 50% losses, as many investors did in the last decade, 2000, and then again 2008, 50% losses in the same 10-year period. If you were adding to your account, or you didn't need any of that money, it didn't make any difference to you. In fact, it was a nice beach entrance to add more shares to your equation. But if you were taking money out, right, if your account saw 50% and you're taking out 4%, Now you're getting past 50%, and that means just to get back to even, you need over 100% gain just to get the account back to where it was. So we really like to kind of make a line of demarcation from the standpoint of, for those who don't need the money now, or don't have and do have a lot of time, or this money isn't necessary, then you can afford to see some declines and not be out. But if you're taking withdrawals, and particularly if the withdrawals are from traditional retirement accounts where the IRS requires you not only to take the withdrawals for the first time ever, you can't stop them after 72 now, and then the withdrawals increase every year for the rest of your account, no matter what your account does. Well, now it's a whole new ball game. And the way we look at it is we find that savvy investors really like limiting their losses. In fact, they hate losses more than they love gains. So they don't mind some market fluctuation, but they do mind a lot of market fluctuation, and they should, because if you're, for whatever reason, if thanks to withdrawals and drawdown, you're off like 60%. Now you need 150%, if I'm not mistaken, just to get back to even. And you tell me if those odds are in your favor. I'm going to say to you, they probably aren't. But if we can limit the losses and the drawdown to, let's say, 20%, well, the math is now we need 25% to get back to even. And that might happen. So for people where it's important to recognize where they might be able to limit those losses or have their portfolio perform within their parameters, you can let the market go down like the Titanic. As long as you can see that your money's not going down with it, you actually can have a nice day, as opposed to pulling out your hair and jumping out of a window.
Right. It is so, I don't know who to, who would you recommend for, like, I know you have a website, but that's what's it's so confusing. The jargon, I think, scares people sometimes. Like you said, the
Yes.
word, it just scares average people. And they're the ones I think that need the most help.
Yeah, the industry should be doing a better job of not talking like attorneys or like doctors or like the patient's not in the room. Okay. And for example, one of the things that we do is we say, Brigitte, are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive? And I'm going to say, I don't know what those terms mean. And typically you don't either. So why are we getting lost in the woods right at the beginning? All right. Maybe a better question might be, let's help you define what kind of loss is acceptable to you. Is it 80%? Is it 8%? In fact, we were just, before you and I got on this conversation, we were talking with the son of a client where mom's money has more than doubled in the last 2 or 3 years. That's the good news. Her brother is managing the account. But what she did not know is something quite surprising. And that is, if the portfolio today was the same portfolio in 2008, when the market was off 37%, and some accounts were off more dramatically than that, her account would have been off 70%. So that was, a big aha moment to go, oh, gee, why? I love all those gains, but I don't want to see any of those losses because I need income for the rest of my life. And by the way, this is a woman who lives. She's been to 78 different countries, and I just applaud her for that. So I think the industry needs to do a better job, and that's one of the reasons we're having conversations along these lines with you and your audience, so that you can see that you may not need to buy and hold and sit and take it, unless that's what you want to do. There may be some ways you can learn from the past, not repeat it blindly, but look to see what happened first quarter 2020, 2008, and reposition or have different strategies in the equations where it might limit your losses. And that way, as I say, you don't need that Hail Mary pass just to get back in the game.
And I think too, you're pretty probably up to date on the tax changes. That happens a lot too. I think that I'm one of those people, I hired someone to do my taxes because I want to make sure it's done properly.
Sure.
And that kind of, even though I'm good in math, right?
Right.
But I'm not good at what you do, or how's that?
Yeah, I mean, when I hire a painter, I can paint the house. Okay, I have.
Right.
But I have to tell you, when I spend a little more money and hire the painter, I watch them and I'm amazed at how they can just, with one line, hit that, doorway, in a way that it's just complete and it's all lined up, and there's no slop anywhere. There's no cleanup. Okay. So when the professionals in the equation, when they're good, they often are very good, and certainly better even than those of us who are trying to do it ourselves. But when it comes to investing money, most of us really feel smart when the account goes up, not so smart when the account goes down. But unfortunately, we don't know what kind of target we're trying to hit. Let me give you an example. I think you know that we are providing free financial planning services to all essential workers. So that's our way of thanking these folks who put their lives on the line
Awesome.
every single day. And we're saying, we'll spend the time with you to help you figure out what your financial plan looks like. So we were working with one couple about making about $100,000 in their mid-30s. And what they were able to see for the first time is at 70, there's going to be better Social Security benefits, some pensions. So they looked at making their retirement optional age at 70 to get to the point where they had the equivalent of $100,000 income without working. Now they see two things. One, the amount they need to accumulate is $2.6 million. That's a
Wow.
big number. But two, with the modest savings they have already, and a contribution of $15,000 or 15% of $100,000, $1,300 a month, getting a 6 or 7% average return, that might help them reach the target that they can see for the first time. So it's about seeing the target as opposed to just enjoying the highs, and then making sure once we get to that level, wherever it might be, how do we limit the losses so that we can afford to stay retired and not try to be a Walmart greeter and discover that you're overqualified, you don't get that job.
Right. You'd mentioned a couple in their 30s. So as they age, get like in their 40s, would you recommend to adjust how much they're putting? I guess it depends, right?
Yeah, it's all individual. Everything we do is 100% customized. So what's right for, the Mallards may be totally inappropriate for the Smiths, as an example. So we like to have lots of conversation with folks in a way that they understand what you're doing. For example, I'm thinking of an engineer couple, they're both engineers, and they want us to believe that they're being conservative with their money. And yet when we look at the portfolio, it's 85% stocks. And we're like, well, I'm sorry, I hear you. And I know that's what you want to believe, but your statement is reflecting a completely different story. And I'm believing the statement, okay? But what happens is people kind of get comfortable. And clearly when we're making gains, we think this is just fine, I'm being conservative. But when we primarily have one or two legs in under our portfolio, we're going to say that's a more aggressive posture. If we have 6 or 7 different legs underneath the same portfolio, life savings, that's going to be, I think, more substantial. So it's a way of bridging the conversation so people can say, wow, yeah, 85% stocks, 15% bonds, that might be 2 legs. And how many other legs might I put under my life savings so that it is possibly more stable as opposed to experiencing more volatility?
Right. You mentioned earlier too about real estate, and I've been seeing a lot people talk about how you got to invest in all this stuff, and there's a lot of development everywhere
Yes.
that's going on, and so that kind of, I don't know, am I wrong? But isn't my understanding is your what you own in real estate really shouldn't be part of your wealth portfolio, or am I wrong?
Well, I mean, we look at real estate, particularly if it's your primary residence. It's a use asset. It's like a
Yeah.
car.
Right.
It's not a ATM machine. But I
Right.
think because so many people have seen themselves make so much money, they just keep looking for these trees to keep growing to the sky. If we look at what the research tells us, it's a very interesting story. And let me back up a bit, because one of the things that really got my attention is like discovering when most Americans buy and eat the most potato chips. And most of us aren't aware that according to the Census Bureau, so we think we're all doing something different, but 14 years old is the age at which most Americans consume the most potato chips, okay? I can relate to that, thinking about it at Audubon Junior High. There was not a day I could pass without some Lay's barbecue potato chips. On the weekends, it was 2-3 bags every day, had to do it, okay? And then so when we, as adults, we find that you have bought the most potato chips when you were about 41 for your, guess what, average 14-year-old. All right. And then you're out of potato chips. You just don't need to look at them again. So it just gives us a sense for how many patterns we're actually immersed in, but we don't see it because nobody points it out. And if we focus on, when it comes to real estate, we've been told to focus on location and inventory and interest rates. Well, that's important, but let's look at the story that the boomers brought to the equation when interest rates are 16% in the early 80s. And the conversation at every cocktail party is, What did you and your husband buy? Have you moved in yet? How well have you done on the purchase? But again, notice that was 16%. So clearly it wasn't interest rates that was any kind of real impediment. It turns out that at 31, there's some kind of bell that seems to ring in Americans' heads where we're like, I got to buy a house. It doesn't matter what the interest rates are. It doesn't matter about location. Doesn't matter about inventory. I got to have one. So Americans tend to buy their first houses around 31, their largest house around 41. And notice from 1980 to 2000, 40% of all the homes in the country were purchased on lot sizes of half an acre to 10 acres in size. Well, that was the boomers stepping up to their McMansion. They couldn't live without it. They wanted to show off their big house to their friends. And my house is bigger than your house, okay? So now people are up in arms about, it's all about inventory. Oh, we don't have enough inventory. Well, wait a minute. Let's look around the corner a little bit. Let's turn on the headlights, plug in the GPS, and here's the deal. 78 is important for two reasons. First, the Census Bureau shows us 78 is the age at which most Americans, guess what, sell their homes. Really. And boomers are now 57 to 75 this year. Soon, in short order, 2 months from now, we'll all be going up a year, right? But 78 is the age at which most people come out of their homes for whatever reason. So the second reason 78 is important is, according to the CDC, we just learned, what, 2-3 months ago, 78 is now the age at which most Americans pass on. So you tell me what you think is going to happen. If it's 76 million people, 24% of the population, take a while, 10, 20 years, whatever it might be, to go to heaven, and the inventory of residential real estate remains stable when it comes to supply and demand, you tell me where prices might go. And I'm going to suggest to you that the people are going to heaven. I'll be optimistic, but the prices and the rents on these real estate projects are going to hell. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
In fact, our research team put some numbers on it. Again, nobody can foresee this, but they're saying, here's how we think it might play out. Because everybody said, well, it's all about neighborhood. Great. Okay. Well, they think the decline in Cleveland might be 13%.
Wow.
But when it comes to the West Coast, they think the decline might be more like 50%. So, you know, if I'm talking to your son, for example, and he says, I got the income and I've got the down payment, should I buy? I'm going to say, well, it's your call. It's your decision. But here's the thing I'd suggest you look at. If you pay $1 million for a house, you put your 10, 20% down, $100,000 or $200,000 down, and that house goes from $1 million to 500,000, how are you going to feel? It might be 6 months, 6 minutes, 6 years from now. How are you going to feel at that point? If that doesn't bother you, then go with God. If that bothers you, I'm going to suggest that you keep your powder dry. Don't buy anything. Let's see how this market unfolds, because you may find, as long as you have that down and you've got a good income, you may have more buying power in short order than you ever imagined you have today. So it all depends on how you want to play the game. Talking to a friend of mine over the weekend with 9 houses, I suggested to her that she just, liquefy half of them, because you've got a lot of upside. As I say, we all understand buy low, sell high when it comes to stocks. But when it comes to real estate, we have this really interesting emotional attachment. And research shows that it tends to take most people about 2 years to process the selling, if that's what they're going to do. But if it makes sense to buy things low and to sell them high, in my opinion, lighten up on half the portfolio, because that's where all of her net worth is. So she's like the person, 85% stock, she's 85% real estate. That's a lot of risk, in our opinion. And this may be a time to take advantage of these nosebleed prices and get the cash and be able to buy the property when they become discounted, as opposed to hoping that the equity stays or comes back. And let me just say this real quick on that note, Brigitte. Let's look at Japan. The Nikkei 225 peaked real close to 40,000, 1229.89. I think it was 39,875. That's pretty close. 40,000, we can round up. That was just at the end of the year 1989. And then it dropped 80%. A year later, Japanese residential real estate dropped 70%.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I like to put it this way to process some thinking. So play along with me. I'm going to ask you which has done better, but I want you to remember when I'm asking you this, that this is a trick question. So do you imagine the Japanese real estate market has come back to its high of 1990, 1991? Or do you think it might have been the Japanese, either the stock market or the real estate market in Japan? Which do you think has gotten back to their highs? This is a trick question. So that tells you the easy answer is.
Yeah, that is a hard question. It's very difficult because my understanding, maybe it's the stock market. I don't, because my understanding in the Japanese culture, they don't have a lot of younger people. And that's why there's so much home inventory, right? Real estate inventory.
They are good savers. They're they tend to be very smart. They're good with math. They tend to be good savers. They tend to make good money. But the reason I was trying to say, to guide you to say it's a trick question, so that maybe you would take that as a clue to say, oh, neither of the two. That's the correct answer. So just wrap your mind around your house was worth whatever it was in 1991. Your stocks were worth whatever they were in 1989. Last time I looked at Nikkei 225, it was below 30,000, around 28,000. So it's still 20% below its high of over 30 years ago. So in this real example, right here before our eyes, neither the Japanese stock market nor the Japanese residential real estate market are back to their highs of what is now about 30 years ago. Could that happen here on our watch?
And you never know. Right.
You don't know. But that's why in our opinion, you can't afford to just get high on the hopium and look at all this appreciation. I mean, you like history, and the first time we saw an event like this happen was looking back at history. They call it modern history, but it was around 1634 in the Netherlands, where with a box of striped tulips, you could buy an estate.
Wow.
Yeah, now that lasted for about 3 years. And then that bubble burst. And by 1637, the price of a box of tulips was about the price of a box of lemons. I don't know what it was, but that just gives you a sense for how things get absolutely crazy. And if you want a modern example of that, most people didn't see, and I was surprised to learn that there's a pair of Kanye West 2008 Nike sneakers that was sold by Sotheby's for a world record of $1.8 million.
For a pair of shoes.
For a pair of used sneakers.
Oh my gosh.
And apparently it was an NFL former player that bought these sneakers. And guess what he's doing? He's turning it into a security with the SEC, so that people who want to have a mini shoe company can buy into the sneakers at $15 a share. I'm saying to you, here we go again. Okay?
That's crazy. Sorry.
That's crazy. That's just a sign of how crazy things have gotten. And that's what I'm saying is that, we need to make sure we recognize when to reposition our assets, as opposed to just keep stacking up everything that seems to be going up and then leaving ourselves in a position where it's an OS moment, and that stands for oh shucks, right?
Yeah, you're using a nice word, right? Wow, I'm learning just so much from you, just listening to those examples. And I like the way you're using examples and analogies, because it makes you understand it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then people just need to be more prepared.
Well, we need to be more vigilant, right? Whether it's coronavirus or whatever the next version of this is going to, crossing the street, don't be stuck on your phone. Because, when people say, well, when do you think this is going to happen? I go, I have no idea. But let's understand, when you and I are jaywalking across the street, looking at our respective phones, it's typically not the bus we see that could disrupt our day. It's the bus we didn't see, we didn't name, and we could not time until we got plastered to the concrete, and maybe we can get up and take a picture of the license plate, or we're done. Okay, so we must be vigilant, and I'm afraid a lot of us right now become very complacent and very comfortable and become like Rip Van Winkle, sticking our head in the sand, where we are exposing some very dear parts.
I like that aspect, being vigilant. It's not just about being prepared. We have to, especially if you have a family.
Right.
But especially, I'm assuming a lot of your clients are older boomers. I'm sorry, Gen X or Gen X generation. So,
we
yeah, we have to prepare for the family.
we have to prepare. We have to learn from the past. I mean, when I talked about Japan, that's the second L-shaped recovery we can see in history. The first one goes back to the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And that's where stocks dropped about 89%, which means $1 million became in about 30 months, 108,000.
Wow.
And one report I find shows that New York real estate a year later, sound familiar, dropped 70%.
Wow.
Yeah. So and so it took stocks over 20 years to get back to even. According to this source, it took real estate about 40 years to get back to even. And let's keep in mind that if we were an adult in the early 1900s, life expectancy was about 57. So if you were 40 and you had $1 million in stocks that went to 108, and you had $1 million in real estate that went to 300,000, you were the $2 million woman, okay? And now you're the $400,000 woman. Are you having a nice day? And neither of those prices got back to their highs while you were on this side of the earth.
Right. That's why
I think a lot of people died with sincere regret. I don't want to see that happen again.
right. I think that's why I'm depressed hearing that, because that's what I call the depression. That example, but that's what happened. That's why we need to be cognizant and understand history and be
Yes, and cause our professionals or ourselves, if we're doing it ourselves, to go back and look. When the market was off what it was, I think it was about 35% into 2020 first quarter. How did your account perform when the market was off 37% in 2008? You look to see how your account performed. Can you learn anything from that experience that you can apply to be prepared for if and when it happens again? Like I say, if you're prepared, you're fine. You're better prepared than most. And if you're not, then it's probably going to be a lot of regret. And if those positions don't come back soon enough for you, there's that regret thing. And so that's what we're trying to do, is say, hey, look, let's put buy and sell signals in the equation as appropriate for the kind of risk that you're willing to accept. And please identify that risk in dollars and percentages, so that, as I say, if the market's off whatever it is, but you're off a fraction of that, hypothetically, well, it just gives you a little breathing room where you might have a nice day, as opposed to, oh, how bad is it going to get?
And I think last year during COVID, didn't you publish a book?
I did, yes, thank you. Making Finance Make Sense. It's available at eBay, and it's also available at Amazon. And it was, my goal last year to finish the book. You know how that is. You've been successful at that more often than I. So it's nice to get it completed, and it's my way of trying to take some of the mystery out of managing money and make it more like a beach entrance, so people feel that this is something that they can do, and they can do it with confidence, and don't just leave yourself in your little, silo. Make sure you get other impressions. And as I say, our 1-2 punch is active management makes a lot of sense, not just passive accounts, so that they don't stay fully invested necessarily. If that's what the client doesn't want, we can have that portfolio move to cash, like in 08 or first quarter 2020. So that you're not keeping the portfolio 95% invested, 5% in cash. The portfolio may get to 50, 60, 100% cash in a bad year like 08. And then we get out of cash starting around March 9th, 2009, when it looks like the coast is clear to get all of that upside. So and then the second part of our 1-2 punch is, we touched on it, but it's adding other stools under your portfolio. What other pieces to the puzzle can you use to diversify your portfolio, as opposed to saying, well, this was my road to riches and it's the only road I'm going to stay on.
Right. And by the way, again, I want to say your title of your book, it's Making Finance Make Sense. Striving to win. Really, it's just so important, because finance scares people. And I think it's because of all just the language that people aren't used to. And I'm probably guilty of that too in my industry. I'm talking to people and I say stuff and they don't realize it, but I think it's good that you're trying to help people. You're not scaring people. Right. And you're being upfront and honest, and that probably helps people trust you and your organization. So where can people learn more about you, John? What is the website they can find you at?
Sure. Thanks for asking. It's as simple as it sounds, whybepoor.com. So that's WHYBEPOOR.com. So that's a good place to go. And if you, as I say, particularly for people who are essential workers, we are continuing to work with you at no cost. And for those who aren't, we can work out an arrangement to do the plan. But we think in fact, our trademark is the proof is in the planning. That's what we think. Let's take the time to do the planning. And then let's make sure that we're staying on top of what needs to happen to keep the account within your expectations of risk of loss, for example, the best we can. So that way you don't have to just look at the news and worry that your account's probably doing even worse. Let's look at it from the standpoint of how it might be more resistant to declines, or, think of it this way. What do they say if you find yourself in a ditch? First rule, stop digging. So we don't need the account to just keep digging lower and lower while you're busy doing life. Let's have a stopgap measure if that's important to you, so that maybe we can limit those losses, and that way the recovery isn't so dramatic, and it's not as severe, those losses.
I like that. You're a great inspiration, and I'm so glad you're on the podcast. And those that are listening, I'll have the links in the description, ybpoor.com, and a link to his great book, Making Finance Make Sense. And I appreciate your time, John, and I want people to understand that your financial health is just as important as your physical health.
Yeah, we need both.
They're all, I think they're connected. I mean,
well, yeah. To your point, money isn't the only thing, but it touches everything. Right?
It does. It's very, very important. Thank you again, John, and thanks for listening, everybody.